All right, hey, welcome back. This is the second episode of the Agents Unleashed podcast, sponsored by Olas. If you haven't heard of Olas, you haven't heard of Agents Unleashed, let me give you a really quick intro to both. Olas makes it easy for everyone to own and monetize their AI agents, and that includes people like you. For more information on how you could do that, check out olas.network. And Agents Unleashed, an event series from which this podcast gets its name, is the premier event for people interested in AI agents and crypto. Events are held throughout the year all over the world, and there's been 77 speakers and presenters and over 2,500 attendees. To learn more about the event and watch replays of previous editions, head to olas.network/agents-unleashed. All right, so today's episode is a recording of a conversation that I recently had with David Minarsch. David is the CEO and co-founder of Valory, one of the core contributors to Olas. I've actually worked with David for the past 3 years, and I always really appreciate his perspective, and that's why I wanted to have him on the show. I think I'll let the interview speak for itself, so without further ado, here's my conversation with David Minarsch. Yeah, my guest today is David Minarsch, and I wanted to have him on for the second episode to give listeners kind of the lay of the land and help them understand the current state of AI agents. And maybe we'll take some time to look at the past year or so, like where were we in 2024 and where are we now? Where are we going? What's exciting and what are some calls to action, ways that you could get involved in, ways that these AI agents could actually influence your life today. So we'll start at the beginning. David, you have a background in game theory, and I know that you were working with multi-agent systems before you were working with these AI agents that have LLMs hooked up to them. So, or how did you go from game theory and multi-agent systems to what we're calling AI agents or just agents now?
Yeah, great question. I started building agents 2019. So over 6 years ago, and back then what drew me to it was this ability that blockchains pose to agents, which is to have a wallet and to make sort of on-chain commitments with smart contracts, trade in more complex ways, fully programmatically. And so back then we didn't have large language models, and giving an agent a wallet was really kind of eye-opening for me, and that's how I started building software agents with wallets at the time, with specialized AI models rather than these general purpose models we have today.
So when people said AI agent 2 or 3 years ago, what did they mean? And what do they mean now where you've got these foundation models, usually LLMs, but sometimes other kinds of models? Like, what's the difference between the agent of a couple of years ago and what people call an agent today?
The key thing is that in late 2022, ChatGPT arrived on the scene, right? And then people started, including us, realizing that you can actually build much more general purpose agents that way if you build an agentic system around a large language model, where previously, by design, your agent would be like domain specific and highly limited because you had to like sort of upfront give it a number of AI models, which would maybe allow it to, forecast like some price or do some small reinforcement learning here or there. Now you could suddenly like have your agent prompt a model and have the model drive a lot of the decisions of the agent. So it really fundamentally shifted what you could build, and now over the last few years these models have gotten better and better as well. So initially there was like quite well performing but limited large language models. They themselves have gotten better. Now we have also the reasoning models, so really kind of shifts what you can do. And I think we're going more and more from these sort of agentic systems that have sort of rules at the core and models at the periphery to agentic systems where the model is at the core and the tools and rules are at the periphery. So the model sort of autonomously selects like tools and makes, maybe there's some kind of sense checking rules around it.
Do you think most people understand that distinction between like a rules-based agent and this more open-ended autonomy that you can get from having your agent prompt the model?
I would say no. I mean, there's still a lot of, obviously some builders do, and I think as an end user, you don't necessarily have to, right? There's also with tech often like people don't really like to look into the past. Like they kind of look at what they have in front of them right now, and then they do a bunch of reinvention of the wheel sort of thing. Multi-agent system isn't something new. Like there's been a lot of research into it. What obviously is very new are the kind of AI models we have access to, and as a result, the kind of agents we can build is vastly different. Now you have coding agents, right, which are actually quite useful. Like you didn't have that in the past. So I think it's always healthy to kind of look in the past and see, okay, what have people built before and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, definitely. And later in the conversation, I want to compare what's been happening in Web2 agents with what crypto agents can do. And so we're going to come back to like what we were able to do before and that difference. I think we were just kind of talking about like the current state and like maybe misapprehension. So like what do you feel is like missing in the conversation around AI agents in crypto? I feel like there's a disconnect between like what the real utility is and like the way that people talk about them.
I would say so. I mean, I think it's always has to be seen in the backdrop of like the incentives, right? Like in crypto, people are incentivized to talk up certain things where they think the meta is going and where they think they can make money. And obviously, in recent months, there has been these sort of influencer style agents where it's really only partially about the agents. The agent is like the kind of marketing element of it, and to an extent, the product. Like, you know, some people actually use the agents, but very few most of the time. And really, it's more about the underlying tokens. So I see it as a continuation of this sort of meme coin craze. You know, like at some point, people gave up on utility and went for meme coins. And then, like with these agents, you kind of have a little bit of this sort of utility coming back, but not really. I mean, are you really gonna get excited about the utility of some of those like social posting agents? Like, it's limited. But at the same time, I mean, what fundamentally changed, I think, with that phase, I would say from November till January or whatever, um, this year is that, let's say a year ago, people in crypto would still be like, what? Like crypto agents? Like that's not a thing. Now that's like not the case, right? Like people have like, for better or worse, have like an image in their head of like what an agent in crypto is. And I think for better or worse, because the better is now there's attention for the concept as a whole, but the worse is it's still like wild, like so undersold, like you say, like so under appreciated how powerful it can be to give agents a wallet, and how powerful it can be for the products. Like I really like to think of it as sort of, you know, the original notion of crypto was like not your keys, not your coins. That sort of sums up a lot of what early believers in crypto were kind of on about, like decentralization, censorship resistance, self-sovereignty, these kind of things. With AI, you have like not your weights, not your brain, in a sense. Like, you know, if I don't own the model, what am I really having here? Like, I can be shut out any moment. And I think what's exciting about agents is you kind of combine that, right? Like an agent without a wallet is not that useful, because it can't really enact things in the world, can't get resources and create new ones, tap into services. An agent without a brain is pointless. So you really want to have both. And so like having an agent that you can own that sort of has that wallet, that has these weights where you like fully in control of it, is like super empowering, and it opens up like this tremendous sea of exciting use cases. And then the other thing I would say is like people are very anchored on augmentation style, you know, experiences. Like everyone's like obviously shaped by the things they have in front of them. So like you have ChatGPT, and then that shapes your experience of what AI can do and will do for you. But that's an augmentation style workflow, right? Like I'm there, I'm working with it, and then I'm gone, and it doesn't, like, it serves others. It doesn't do anything in the background for me. Autonomous AI agents, that's where I'm very excited about, because you basically give an agent a goal, you go away, you do other things, and in parallel to you doing these other things, it does that. And that really scales, right? Like you can really kind of scale yourself, and you can see how there's like loads and loads of agents doing things autonomously on our behalf.
Yeah, for sure. So as I was preparing for our conversation, I was really thinking about the difference between like what I see in Web2 AI agents and what I see in Web3. And we already kind of illustrated maybe a currently limited set of expectations, maybe because it hasn't been that long that the space was taking it seriously. Other than maybe it's just early. Like why this divergence? Like it seems like Web2 agents are actually already starting to do new things, but the people's perception of what a Web3 agent can do is they still underestimate them.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's a couple of things here. So Web3, for better or worse, whenever like most projects basically have two products, at least. They have like whatever the end user product is, like in our case, it's like Pearl, for instance, for Olas, where you have like Agent App Store, and then you also have the token. And that actually can be beneficial because it allows for like kind of bootstrapping. We can get into one day why Olas has a token, how that works, but it can also be really like a problem. It's a distraction, right? Like now you have two products you have to worry about rather than one. Like instead of just making the agent as fantastic as it can be, you also have to deal with this other thing. And if you look at like the space in terms of like what's been doing well recently, it's basically just like token innovation, right? Like, and then thinly wrapped agent stuff. Like the agent stuff is pretty boring, and then there's like kind of token innovation on top. I think that's one aspect. So a lot of energy goes into the token side, and the agent side gets a bit less proportional attention. And then the other thing is funding. I mean, if you look at crypto as a whole, it attracts a lot of funding. But if you look at the AI section of crypto, only attracting funding for maybe a couple of years now, and specifically the agent side, not that much. If you sum that all up, the total funding that's gone into AI agent projects in crypto, I'm pretty sure it's like orders of magnitude lower than what you've gone into coding agents alone, right? Like there's various coding agent and they have serious revenue as well, so they deserve that funding, and they have proven that they have product market fit. They have significant funding, and that drives, obviously, like allows for much more rapid innovation. I think this is like where I would see two reasons for that divergence, which both leads to basically not enough building, and that's really at the core of it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's see if we can close that expectation gap a little bit and talk about the role that Olas is trying to play in this like shift towards making the AI agents that use crypto rails like really useful and accessible to people. So what is the mission of like Valory makes a lot of contributions to Olas as an ecosystem. So like what's the mission right now and what's not?
Yeah, it's about giving you an agent you can own rather than rent. I think we are all aware of the SaaS model, and that's again like the dominant Web2 model in which these agents are served. We say, look, you can own your agent. And why is that valuable to you? Well, precisely because of the points I made earlier, you want to own your keys and you want to own your weights, because it allows you to ultimately be like in charge of your destiny. You avoid these kind of platform risks, which you have if you start like investing in your agent and then suddenly you might not access it because you've prompted it in the wrong way, or the startup just decides you don't have access to it now because they moved on or whatever reason. And it also unlocks entirely new use cases. So for instance, for us, Valory the Labs, who's building into Olas open source ecosystem, we are offering an open source bundle, which is called Modius. It's a DeFi agent. Ultimately, the user self-hosts that and self-custodies it. And that's very important actually for the product offering, because it ultimately means that there's no like kind of centralized like financial platform offering the service. If that was so, right, you'd immediately fall under all sorts of financial regulation and the product would look very different. So you can build like fundamentally different products that way, and you can offer like a totally different value proposition to the user. And what is it not? Like, we are broadly building autonomous AI agents and facilitating people to build autonomous AI agents, right, on the Olas stack. But we're always interested in these more end-to-end autonomous use cases rather than these augmentation use cases. So we're not so much interested in like a use case where, let's say, a DeFi user comes and chats with an interface to then get a transaction object to maybe move some funds into some DeFi protocol. Instead, what we say, look, let everything be done by the agent. You just tell the agent your goal, and then the agent handles it. And that's just in this example of DeFi, but it sort of applies to all the use cases we're looking at.
Yeah, for sure. I know many times I've heard you say that like a talking wallet has no moat, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And what you're just describing also touches a little bit on like this concept of the agent economy, where there are multiple rules for the agent, and by decentralizing and or distributing people to run it all over the world, you can create something, a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that seems like something that would be very difficult to replicate in the Web2 world, where, as you say, you've got the platform risk, and yeah, I mean, if even one of those parts goes down, like it will just stop. And I also, in a second, I want to ask about like the commodification of models and how that will affect the direction that AI agents take. But before I get there, Olas has this accelerator program, which is like a way to really double down on bringing people into the ecosystem to build AI agents. I think a lot of people might wonder, well, if Valory has all of this domain-specific knowledge about the code base, like why would you want to spend this time to get other people to build rather than build the agents yourself? This is something I hear a lot.
We do build some agents ourselves, but ultimately you're also constrained by your own imagination and like your team's like expertise. Like, it's quite hard to build really groundbreaking agents in a bunch of verticals. So I think that's one way to look at it. The other one is it obviously scales better from a model perspective to get like an accelerator system going where you have like a sort of venture model. Some teams will do well, some teams might not do well. Some products will, in the sense of like the end user might like the products or not, and you don't really know this upfront. Also, I would say Plus as a protocol is very focused on sort of bootstrapping these agent economies, as you mentioned before, which basically means you want to bring a lot of like very diverse use cases where the agents themselves offer the services to each other. So when I was earlier saying, okay, like it's important for an agent to have a wallet, it's important for an agent to have its own brain, for you as a user to own this whole system, right, outright rather than renting it. Like, why is it important that the agent has the wallet? Well, one thing is obviously it can then do things on your behalf in, let's say, DeFi. But the other key thing is that if you look at the web as a whole, I think we like kind of went from like reading websites where you just needed to go to that website, you needed to find it and then read it. There was no there was no sign on or anything, like you just went and had a look. Then we had apps, and we still have them obviously, where you write, and because you're writing to some database, you need some layer of permissioning, right? And so in traditional Web2, that's solved with like with a login. Like you have an account and you log in, and then that gives you rights to write to certain parts of the application. Now, then along came Web3, where you have this whole idea of, okay, I can actually own some digital assets and, even my data and my identity and so on chain. And like anyone can do that. Writing again becomes more permissionless, but it's now attached to a wallet. And the exciting thing, I think we're now moving into the web of agents. Maybe, someone will call it Web 4, whatever. It doesn't really matter. In the web of agents, I think there'll be an interesting point now where we'll see how it falls. But I strongly believe that agents are most powerful when they can do things permissionlessly with just a wallet. So this idea that an agent needs 100 different API keys for all the 100 different platforms it needs to tap into is not going to fly, in my opinion, because you mostly have then this friction around the kind of sign-up process into these platforms, right? And often it's just not feasible to have this fully programmatically done. You could think that there's maybe some centralized hubs or so, and I'm sure they'll happen, like Amazon, comes up with the agent hub or whatever, which is a sort of centralized gateway. But clearly there's already one such centralized hub that's totally open. And this is like things like Ethereum and, public blockchains where any agent can rendezvous and find other agents, tap into their services and simply pay them with a micropayment. And we at Olas have built like a marketplace that facilitates that. And I see that as the sort of other side of the coin. If you want to have user-owned agent that the user owns, and here the user can, end user or business, then the flip side of that is the agent the user owns wants to be maximally autonomous. So if it can do everything and anything with the wallet, that's great. And that's what this kind of marketplace architecture enables.
Right. I think that gets to my question that I wanted to ask about the commodification of foundation models. Sometimes when in the crypto and AI space, you would hear people saying that the only way that it made sense was that if all of the AI models were decentralized. And that's a nice idea, but I think that especially from you, I've heard a flip of how to think about it. You can have an ownable layer between that where then the models sort of become interchangeable. And could you say a little bit more about that and how you think that this new batch of models like DeepSeek, for example, where they're finally like real and accessible competitors to some of the Silicon Valley giants, like how do you think that's going to change the kinds of agents that we see, and how might the MEC marketplace make that more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, I firstly think that unless we really have like one of those occasionally talked about like really fast takeoffs where you have like some sort of super AI emerge that changes everything because it's so centralizing in its force and its ability to self-improve or whatever, then I think what we'll see is that there's relatively high degrees of competition. I mean, already at the moment, certainly that's the case. Like there's a lot of commoditization with the models, and we have access now to quite a few open source models, and both on the reasoning side and the previous large language, like simpler large language models, where it's interesting because if you look at it from a purely economics perspective, and like that's my original background, like it's also a funny kind of element to the just recent tariff announcements, but basically comparative advantage is a thing, right? So like, and some people don't get that clearly, but basically what this means is like you can, two parties can benefit from trade, and two parties can specialize in different things and benefit from specializing in different jobs and then selling each other services or goods, right? That's what we're observing in the real economy. That's what created all the prosperity. And there's nothing fundamentally here about humans, right? It's just about like how the incentives and the economic system works. And so I would suspect that with agentic systems, you have the same. Like we already see this in Olas, like it helps us build specialized agents that tap into each other for services rather than building one monolithic agent. And so I think what we'll see is that that's going to happen much, much more. Where yes, you have like your occasionally quite powerful monolithic system like a coding agent, but ultimately that will stay a coding agent. It will not also, act as your holiday planner or some agent that then deploys things into production. That's probably going to be like a separate agent that then monitors these things, deploys them, and so on. And so naturally, by necessity, as a result, you have this requirement for these agents to interact. And once you think about that in a cross-organizational fashion, then you're back to what we just discussed earlier. Like there's going to be trade, and there's already trade between agents, and there need to be like interfaces where these agents find each other and so on.
Yeah, cool. One last related question that I think touches on many of these ideas, but in a slightly different way. I saw a clip recently where Signal's president was talking about this idea that AI agents are threatening to break the blood-brain barrier between the application layer and the operating system layer. And the examples that she was giving were things like to achieve a certain outcome, your agent, your personal assistant agent, would need sufficient access to things like your personal information, for example, for booking travel. Like you need pretty much all of your personally identifiable data and your payments also. And when I watched this, I thought like unironically, like blockchain solves this. And I'm curious, like if you've seen this and what you thought about it.
I mean, yes, I've seen it, and I agree. I mean, if that's exactly why we care about user-owned agents. Like again, like there's a tech. I love tech, but there's always this over focus on like the now and this extreme focus on the future as well, and the history gets immediately forgotten. Like it's not the case that the internet started as this sort of cloud infra where everyone hosts off a bunch of like companies. It was the exact opposite. It was extremely decentralized, and I think there's a good chance we'll go back to that for exactly these kind of reasons. Like if you think about like the most powerful agents, well, be they software agents that live on some device, like a mobile phone or desktop or whatever, or be it like humanoids, even like who then have like a physical appearance and live next to you. It's not like, for a whole bunch of reasons, it's not very appealing, and I think for the majority of people not appealing to have these things sort of rented and like offered from like a centralized provider where all the data flows back to. So let's just go for a number of examples. So let's say you have this household robot who, does like your chores and so on. What equivalents do we have today in our lives? Well, we have cars, we have washing machines, these kind of things. They are increasingly having a lot of, let's say, digital technology inside of them, right? When historically there were like simple machines with like maybe a little controller somewhere and that's it. Now they're connected to the internet often. And the problem with this is you're increasingly giving up a lot about your privacy and like the data at home, but also these things become inscrutable. Like if I have a car from 15 years ago or 10 years ago, I can take it apart and I pretty much know what this thing is doing. I mean, it was so like maybe the radio and so on were like digital, and the rest, like maybe there was some control stuff inside. It certainly wasn't connected to the internet. Now if you take a Tesla, like you can take it apart, but you don't know how this thing is going to act on the street, right? Because it's connected to like a central server farm, and that has a lot of challenges, and I think like we're only starting to become aware of them, and there is, for various reasons, I'm sure, going to be a massive like backlash against this. I don't think it will go away, but we'll have to solve some of those problems. Like geopolitically, I mean, if we continue on the current trend, right, it's just not going to be acceptable to have like a car from a certain area drive in another area. People won't accept that, full stop, for geopolitical reasons. But then also for privacy reasons, people won't trust these things beyond a certain point. Like I wouldn't trust a robot in my family's home, because if I can't dissect it, if I don't know that there's like a whole open source community who has like looked at it from all angles, like who's gonna promise me that it's not gonna turn around and act against me or my family, right? And so I think those are the sort of crasser examples, but then it's as simple as like, as you say, with travel booking for the holidays, and we're still on this trajectory where we just share all this data into these applications. It started with Facebook and then all the others, and there has been these occasional backlashes against this. But I think as we're now maturing with the technologies we have available, we don't have to do all the sharing. Like we can prove our identity in a cryptographically secure way where we don't have to share that document. We can just share like certain certificates and like signatures which prove that we hold this document and that is still valid and so on, right? And so these kind of services, I think, will become increasingly important as we have the agents as well. And so yes, I agree with the statement, but I also think we'll see a lot of pushback, and there will be some areas where it just doesn't matter maybe as much, maybe coding agents, although depending how worried you are about your IP, it does matter a lot. And then other areas like these privacy areas where I think it'll matter a lot to a lot of people. And I guess we'll also see a lot of heterogeneity, like diversity in regions, in the way in which they accept, like, across the world, in which they accept like these privacy requirements, and whether they make them a thing or not.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay, so we'll wrap up here. Before we go, though, I want to give you the opportunity to put out a call to action.
Yeah, our biggest call to action right now is for the accelerator, which we covered earlier. So I would encourage people who are building serious agents to apply. We're very interested at the moment in sort of crypto neo use cases where the agents actually use the wallets for some part of what they do. But increasingly, we also look at like more Web2 native agents. So yeah, please do apply.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Well, David, thank you for your time. I think this is going to be very educational for people, and I hope that they'll find it as exciting as it is for me to hear these ideas from you. This show will be coming out on a regular basis, so maybe we'll have you on in the future. But yeah, otherwise, thank you for your time, and I'll see you around.
Thanks for your time. See you soon, Thomas.
Ciao. Bye-bye. All right. Wow. Well, what did you think of that? We got through a lot of material in under 30 minutes. I really enjoyed the conversation, but I'd love to know what you think. If you have any feedback, comments, or questions, please reach out to either me or David on X. I am at Thomas Maybrier, and David is at David_ENIM. Before we go, I'd like to ask you to please subscribe to the show, and if you haven't shared it with a friend, family member, or colleague, why not do so? It'll help me grow the show and expand the types of content and guests that I'm able to bring you in the future. This has been Agents Unleashed. I'm Thomas Maybrier, and I'll see you next time.